I never expected a thank you. Not from them. Not after years of biting my tongue, staying out of the spotlight, and choosing peace instead of proving points. My family never saw me as someone worth respecting. I was the quiet one, the so-called failure who never followed the path they laid out. While my cousins flaunted titles and my siblings paraded promotions like trophies, I kept my head down and worked on something they never cared to ask about. To them, I was just existing. No wife, no kids, no big announcements. Just the disappointment they tolerated for family's sake. So when the invitation came for a family strategy meeting, I already knew what it would be. My father sent it like he was calling a boardroom session. He always ran the family like a corporation, barking orders and measuring worth by income and applause. Everyone showed up on time that evening, dressed like they were heading to a shareholders' gala instead of a family home. I arrived last. Deliberately. I didn't want small talk. I wanted the show to begin, so I could watch how they performed before the final act unfolded. They didn't disappoint. The moment I entered the room, the air shifted. Not with warmth or welcome, but with that familiar tinge of polite condescension. My brother barely nodded. My cousin smirked. My sister looked at me like I'd wandered in by mistake. I took the empty seat at the far end of the table, next to the door. My uncle, the self-proclaimed patriarch in waiting, opened the meeting with the same tone he used for board presentations. We're here to talk about the company's direction and what's expected from each of us moving forward. I said nothing. I just watched and listened and waited. One by one, they spoke. My brother, head of sales, bragged about his latest contracts. My cousin, finance lead, droned on about profit margins. My sister chirped about brand presence and digital expansion. When it came to me, there was a pause. Then laughter. What about you? My brother said, tapping the table. Still working on that mystery startup? Or are you finally looking for a real job? My cousin added, maybe he's here to take notes. The room burst into laughter like they were auditioning for a cruel sitcom. My father didn't stop them. He never did. Instead, he leaned forward and said, "Son, you've had enough time to find yourself. What exactly do you bring to this table?" For a moment, I let the silence stretch. I wanted to feel it, the smug grins, the smirks, the shared glances of amusement. I wanted it to burn deep so that when the truth came, it would sting harder. I looked around the table, locking eyes with each of them. "I'm here," I said, calmly, because I wanted to see how long it would take before someone asked the right question. Confusion flickered. "What question?" my sister scoffed. I reached into my coat and pulled out a folder. "Who owns this company?" I placed it in the center of the table. No one moved. "You're joking," my cousin said, still smiling but less certain now. My voice remained steady. "I'm not." Inside the folder were the official documents, share transfer agreements, acquisition confirmations, the new board list with my name at the top. 2 weeks ago, the board approved a private acquisition offer, when no one here knew about. You all missed it because you were too busy laughing. Too busy underestimating me. My father snatched the folder and scanned it, eyes widening as he flipped through each page. No one laughed anymore. "I bought the company," I said quietly. "Every share. Every stake. It's mine now." The silence was thick. You could feel the weight of it pressing down on the table. My brother looked pale. My cousin leaned back like the chair had betrayed him. My sister blinked rapidly, as if trying to reboot a frozen thought. My father just stared. He didn't speak. For the first time in my life, the man who had once told me I'd never amount to anything had nothing to say. I stood up slowly, adjusting my coat. "You asked me what I bring to this table," I said. "The answer is simple. I bring the table." And then I walked out. No one followed. But this wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about proving to myself that I had never needed their validation. I had built something on my own terms. And now, they'd have to live with the fact that the person they called worthless was the one they now worked for. The silence from that room followed me long after I walked out. I could feel it clinging to the walls like stale perfume, bitter, thick, and desperate to be explained. My footsteps echoed as I left the estate, slower than usual, not because I wanted to dramatize the moment, but because I was soaking it in. For the first time in my life, I hadn't defended myself. I hadn't raised my voice, hadn't begged for respect. I had simply let the truth speak louder than their opinions. That power, that calm. It was unfamiliar, and yet it fit me like skin. The days that followed were quiet on the surface, but beneath it all, I knew the ground was shifting. My father didn't call. Neither did my siblings. There were no apologies, no explanations, just silence. The kind of silence that comes when pride is cornered and too ashamed to speak. I didn't expect gratitude. I knew them too well. They would be scrambling, meeting in corners, poring over every clause in the acquisition to see if there was some loophole, some error in my ownership. But there wasn't. Every document had been double-checked. Every signature secured. They'd handed it over without ever knowing who stood behind the curtain. It had taken me 3 years. Quiet, meticulous, unseen. I started small. Investing in minor shares, partnering with third-party entities, building connections with sleeping board members who felt their influence slipping. I never wore a suit to meetings. I didn't walk in with a pitch deck or make promises I couldn't keep. I just listened. I listened when they talked about cash flow concerns. I listened when board members complained about mismanagement. I listened when they whispered about succession plans and slow innovation. And when the time came, I made an offer that was too precise to ignore and too subtle to question. What they never realized was that my so-called absence had been my greatest disguise. While they were parading their quarterly bonuses at family dinners, I was building the very floor they were dancing on. And now, they were standing on a foundation with my name etched into every brick. I didn't need them to clap. I just needed them to understand. Silence doesn't mean surrender. Sometimes it's strategy. On the 4th day after the meeting, my brother sent a message. Short, cold. We need to talk. No greeting. No apology. I replied with a time and location, my office. Not the shared company headquarters, but the newer, sleeker building I had leased downtown after the acquisition. I wanted him to walk into a space he didn't build, sit at a table he never paid for, and realize the weight of the new order. When he arrived, he looked smaller than I remembered. Same expensive watch, same arrogant gait, but there was hesitation in his eyes now. I suppose congratulations are in order, he said as he sat down, his tone somewhere between sarcasm and shame. I didn't smile. Why are you here? I asked. He leaned forward. You've made your point, okay? You shocked everyone. But you're not a CEO. You don't have the experience. You've never managed a company this size before. I nodded slowly. You're right, I said. I don't have experience in being loud or being handed power. But I do have experience in building quietly, in listening, in knowing what this company needs without making a show of it. That's why I'm here. That's why you're not. He clenched his jaw. So what now? You're just going to run everything alone. I slid a folder across the table. Inside was a proposal, structured roles, revised reporting lines, merit-based evaluations. You'll stay, I told him, if you choose to earn your place. No more family favoritism. No more ego games. Just work. Real work. He flipped through the pages. I watched him read the line that mattered most. All leadership must reapply for their positions under the new governance structure. His hands trembled. You're making us start over. I met his eyes. No. I'm giving you the chance to finally start right. The meeting ended without a handshake. He left with the file, quieter than he came. I knew he would go straight to the others. I wanted him to. Because word spreads fast in a family that feeds on status. And this time, I was starving that status of the one thing it had always consumed without permission, control. By the end of the week, my sister reached out. Then my cousin. Each conversation followed the same rhythm. Shock, resistance, reluctant curiosity. And with each call, I made it clear, this wasn't a family business anymore. It was a business that happened to include family. The rules had changed. The ground had shifted. And they could either walk forward or fall behind. But through it all, I never once raised my voice. I didn't insult them. I didn't punish them. I didn't take anything they didn't hand to me first. All I did was stop asking for space and start owning it. And in that silence, I found something I never expected to, peace. The following Monday marked my official first day as the company's new owner, though I didn't care much for the title. I wasn't interested in being worshipped. I didn't need anyone bowing or gasping when I walked in. What I wanted, what I needed, was to rebuild the company into something that wouldn't need saving every time someone's ego spun out of control. So I walked through the front doors quietly, like I'd always done, but this time every eye in the building followed me, not with admiration yet, but with the confusion of people trying to figure out who the new storm belonged to. I didn't schedule a formal press announcement. No grand reopening. No corporate video with stock music and hollow mission statements. Instead, I called for a meeting, not for the public, but for the staff. Every department, every floor. I wanted them to hear the truth directly from me, not through edited memos or management translations. The room filled slowly. Faces I hadn't seen in years. Workers who never spoke during board visits. Middle managers still loyal to the old hierarchy. They were all there. They were watching, waiting, and some of them, no doubt, were hoping I'd fail just to restore their comfort. I stood in front of them with no podium, no PowerPoint. Just me, a black folder, and a single statement. For too long, this company has been run on noise. I'm here to build on silence. That puzzled a few. Others, the ones who had endured the behind-the-scenes dysfunctions, leaned in. I continued, there will be no more promotions based on last names. No more dismissals and closed-door meetings without accountability. And no more pretending that silence means weakness. Because it doesn't. It means strategy. It means listening. It means change. The room stayed still. I didn't expect applause. I expected resistance. I got both. When I returned to my office, there were already emails waiting. Department heads looking to clarify their roles. Assistants wondering if the leadership structure was about to collapse. And a few brave staffers, real workers, who sent quiet thank yous. Those notes meant more to me than any congratulatory champagne toast. They came from people who had no stake in flattery. People who simply wanted a leader who saw them. That evening, I met with HR and legal to finalize what I called the rebuilding terms. It wasn't just a performance overhaul. It was a value reset. Every senior staff member had to undergo a review period. Not just KPIs and revenue charts. I wanted peer feedback, floor reports, anonymous team evaluations. If you led through fear, you were out. If you coasted on your surname, you were out. If you spent more time networking than working, you were out. This wasn't a vendetta. It was alignment. The kind no one ever dares attempt when their name isn't on the ownership certificate. Of course, the pushback came swiftly. My cousin, formerly head of finance, stormed into my office, waving a report in hand. "You're dismantling the foundation of this place," she shouted. I stayed seated. "No," I replied, "I'm reinforcing it. And if that foundation can't survive without shortcuts and corruption, then maybe it's time it collapsed." She threatened to resign. I nodded toward the door. "Then you're free to do so. But know this, once you step out, you don't step back in." She didn't resign. She stormed out, but I knew she'd read the room by morning. They always did. What surprised me wasn't the backlash. It was how many stayed. Some even embraced the change. Junior analysts began speaking up in strategy meetings. Engineers submitted improvement plans that had sat in drawers for years. One team assistant developed a new process flow that saved thousands in operational costs, something the previous leadership had ignored because she didn't hold a title. I promoted her the same week, gave her a department of her own. When word of that spread, I saw something shift in the building. Fear didn't disappear, but for the first time, it was competing with hope. Late one evening, I passed by the employee lounge and overheard two interns talking. "He doesn't talk like a boss," one said. "Yeah," the other replied. "He talks like he remembers what it's like to be ignored." I paused outside the door, heart still. That was it. That was the entire mission. I didn't return to be worshipped. I came back to remind them, and myself, that power doesn't need to shout when it's rooted in purpose. I wasn't building a company anymore. I was building a standard. One decision, one policy, one uncomfortable conversation at a time. And this time, no one was going to laugh their way through it. Not without facing what was waiting on the other end of the smirk: ownership. I wasn't the disappointment anymore. I was the architect of their second chance. Whether they liked it or not. You can always tell who's holding real power by who stops smiling when the music changes. And in the weeks that followed, I watched plenty of smiles fade. The kind of forced grins that once filled boardrooms and family dinners started vanishing the moment people realized their old tricks no longer worked. No more skipping accountability meetings. No more hiding behind surnames. No more flaunting connections like credentials. The game had changed. And for the first time, I was the one holding the rulebook. Not out of vengeance, but out of necessity. Because if I didn't redraw the lines, they'd keep pretending they owned the field. One by one, my family began to show cracks. My sister, formerly head of marketing, began missing deliverables. She blamed her team, then her assistant, then claimed the new system was slowing her down. But her numbers told a different story. When I summoned her to my office, she walked in with the same attitude she'd worn since childhood, dismissive, flippant, coated in perfume and entitlement. "This new era of yours," she said, sinking into the chair like it owed her comfort, "it's turning everything upside down." I nodded. "That's the point." She rolled her eyes. "You really think you're the one to fix all this?" I opened a file. Her quarterly performance, matched against her peers, paired with team feedback and client satisfaction metrics. It didn't lie. "You were never hired because you were the best," I said, my voice even. "You were hired because Dad didn't believe in outsiders. But this company can't afford legacy placeholders anymore." She looked away, jaw tight. "Are you firing me?" she asked. I shook my head. "I'm offering you a choice. Stay and earn your place. Or leave and free the seat for someone hungry enough to deserve it." She said nothing, but I saw the fear in her eyes. For once, the brand she wore couldn't cover what she lacked. It was like that for the next few weeks. Meetings turned from smug declarations to quiet reckonings. My cousin in legal, once the loudest critic of my lack of experience, suddenly became the first to volunteer policy improvements. My brother began showing up to work early, not because he believed in me, but because he knew the walls were closing in on old habits. Even my father, who had remained eerily silent since the family meeting, requested a private lunch. I agreed, not because I needed his words, but because I wanted to hear them fall short. We met at the same restaurant he used to bring clients to, dark wood, overpriced wine, and the ghost of his former swagger lingering in every corner. He didn't greet me with warmth, just a curt nod. "I underestimated you," he said halfway through his steak. "I didn't think you had it in you." I placed my napkin beside my plate. "You didn't think I mattered," I corrected. "And that's what made this possible." He winced slightly. "You know your mother wouldn't have wanted all this fighting." I leaned back. Then maybe she should have raised children who didn't turn family into a competition. The silence between us stretched for several long seconds. He looked down, then back up. "What now?" he asked. I smiled, but not the kind he was hoping for. "Now you get to watch what leadership looks like when it's earned, not inherited." We didn't hug. We didn't shake hands. We parted with the quiet understanding that the man he raised to sit at the kids' table was now running the dining hall. But as much as it may sound like triumph, this wasn't a victory lap. It was a cleanup. Because behind every new decision I made was the damage they left behind: employees who never spoke up because promotions were predetermined, suppliers who lost trust in inflated pricing games, young talent who walked away before ever being heard. I spent hours with those people, not as a CEO, but as someone who had also been ignored. I listened. I took notes. I asked what they needed that they never got before. And the answers weren't grand. They were simple. Fairness, feedback, and the chance to be seen. It wasn't long before the culture began to shift. Not from the top, but from the center. People started proposing ideas in meetings they used to sit silent through. Junior staff stopped waiting for permission to contribute. Teams that once followed orders began building solutions before they were even asked. And all of it without having to raise a voice or threaten a demotion. The fear was fading, and in its place, something stronger began to bloom: ownership. Late one night, I stood at the window of the corner office I never wanted but finally earned. Below me, the city pulsed with life, cars, lights, possibilities. Behind me, the company I had once been deemed too unimportant to run was finally beginning to breathe again. I didn't feel proud. I felt responsible. Because when you take back something that was built to exclude you, the victory isn't in holding it. It's in opening the door for others who've been locked out too. And for the first time, The company wasn't built on legacy or names. It was built on work, on truth, on voices that once whispered and now roared. And if my family didn't like the sound of it, well, they'd had their turn. I used to sit in the corner at family dinners, the seat furthest from our father, furthest from the stage of praise. They'd talk over me, joke about my silence, fill the room with the noise of their achievements, promotions, properties, vacation homes. I never interrupted. I never corrected. I let them talk, let them build a world where I didn't exist. But now, the weighting had shifted. I wasn't the one sitting quietly anymore. They were. And they were learning what it felt like to watch decisions get made from the outside of the circle they once controlled. I didn't go out of my way to humiliate them. That wasn't the point. I gave them new roles, stripped of vanity titles, grounded in actual work. My sister now reported to someone 10 years younger, someone she once mocked for being too quiet in meetings. My brother was placed in charge of field operations, boots on the ground, not behind a glass wall. And my cousin, the one who once said I was good at being invisible, now had to present his ideas at the same all-staff meetings where he used to take credit for others' work. I didn't punish them. I gave them chances, real ones, for the first time in their lives. At first, they resisted. I could see it in their posture, the way they held themselves in meetings, rigid, defensive, rehearsed. But slowly, as the system began to work, as results came in, as promotions went to interns and managers based on output instead of last names, they began to bend. Not all at once, but cracks appeared. My sister once stayed an hour after work to help a junior designer on a project. My brother congratulated a warehouse supervisor on streamlining delivery schedules. My cousin, for the first time, credited his entire team in a report. It wasn't perfection, but it was progress. Still, there were moments when their old selves clawed through. One afternoon, I overheard my father's voice in the office lobby, loud, dismissive, the way he used to speak at home when things didn't go his way. "I built this family," he said to one of the guards. "It's only right they remember who the real leader is." I didn't confront him. I just walked past, nodded once, and let the silence answer for me. Because what he hadn't learned was this: real leadership doesn't beg to be remembered. It shows up, gets the job done, and lets the work speak louder than the name. That night, he called me. For the first time in months. "You've made your point," he said flatly. "You have control now." I stayed silent. He continued, "So what happens next?" I replied, "That depends. Are you asking as a father? Or as a former executive?" He didn't respond right away. Then, with a sigh, he said, "I'm just asking as someone who doesn't know where he stands anymore." I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered every moment I'd sat quietly in his shadow. Every time he dismissed my ideas. Every time he'd allowed the others to talk down to me like I was a visitor in my own bloodline. So I answered carefully, "You stand where your actions placed you. That's all any of us can do." He didn't call again. Meanwhile, the company began to flourish. Not just in numbers, but in spirit. There was laughter in the hallways again, the kind that came from genuine collaboration. Not performative niceties. New client accounts came in. Employee turnover dropped. Interns applied in record numbers. It wasn't because I was a genius. It was because the people finally believed the system wasn't rigged, that merit had returned. And trust, real trust, had walked through the front door again. One afternoon, I received a letter, handwritten, from a former employee who had quit 2 years ago under my brother's leadership. "I heard about the changes," she wrote. "I wish this had happened sooner, but I'm glad it's happening now. You reminded us that patience isn't weakness. It's just quiet strength waiting for its turn." I kept that letter in my desk, not for ego, but for grounding. Because as much as I was building forward, I needed to remember what I had come from. The corners, the quiet, the long silence before the world finally noticed. At the next board meeting, I looked around the table. New faces, old ones adapting, younger voices speaking confidently. There was no gavel, no declarations, just open plans and shared credit. And for once, everyone leaned in, not to posture, but to listen. And just like that, I knew the company wasn't mine anymore. Not the way it had been when I first bought it. Now, it belonged to the people building it. Every late-night worker, every overlooked assistant, every person who had once been treated like I was. And my family. They were learning, some slowly, some painfully, that the world didn't owe them a seat anymore. Not unless they were willing to earn it. I never imagined the quiet would feel this good. It wasn't the silence of isolation or shame, not like before. This was a different kind of stillness. The kind that follows a long battle when the dust finally settles and you can hear yourself breathe again. The family, the company, the legacy, it was all still there. But it had changed. Or maybe I had. And now, with everything in place and the chaos behind me, I wasn't chasing their approval anymore. I was living in something far greater, peace. And not the kind they gave, but the kind I created for myself. One morning, I arrived early and walked the entire building floor by floor. I greeted every person by name. Some had been promoted. Others were new hires. A few were the same quiet staffers who used to lower their heads when my relatives walked past. Now they stood tall, smiled without fear. It hit me then. This was no longer about revenge or redemption. It was about restoration. And in restoring the dignity that had been stripped from so many, I had unknowingly restored my own. The man they once ignored had become the reason they looked forward to Mondays again. I had a standing invitation to every department's quarterly review, not to control, but to listen. One day, a young assistant in HR asked, "What kept you going when everyone called you a failure?" I thought about that for a long moment before replying. Because I knew they were wrong. And I didn't need to shout to prove it. I just needed time. She nodded slowly, and I could tell it landed. That's what this entire journey had become, a lesson in patience. Not passivity, not weakness, but power restrained. Power that didn't react, just rebuilt, brick by careful brick. Weeks later, my family held another gathering. Not a strategy meeting, not a crisis session, just a dinner. No agendas, no presentations, just a long table and all the usual faces. I arrived on time this time. Not early, not late, just right. And when I walked in, they all looked up, not with mockery, not with forced cheer, but with something far rarer. Respect. My brother offered me a seat near the center. My sister passed me a glass. Even my father, aged and quieter now, gave me a nod that said more than any speech he could have given. They didn't apologize. I never expected them to. But sometimes, the absence of pride is apology enough. They saw now, not just what I had done, but how. Without screaming, without threats, without throwing a single stone, I had bought the company, changed its heartbeat, and rebuilt a culture that no longer served just the loudest in the room. And I had done it without losing my soul. That was the real win. Later that evening, I stepped outside and looked up at the company name glowing from the rooftop across the city skyline. A name I once thought would never be tied to mine. A name that used to represent everything that shut me out. Now, it stood for something else entirely. Not just a business, but a legacy rewritten in silence, strength, and conviction. I didn't need anyone to say it. I didn't need their approval or their guilt. I already had everything I came for. My story wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about proving that I was right to believe in myself, even when no one else did. Because sometimes, the most powerful revenge is not revenge at all. It's walking away with your head high, your peace intact, and letting the ones who doubted you sit in the silence you left behind. If this story struck a chord with you, share it with someone who's ever been underestimated, laughed at, or quietly dismissed. Remind them, the loudest person in the room isn't always the strongest. Sometimes, the one who stays silent is just busy building.